Hello and welcome to the Mobalytics patch 11.5 tier list. I'm Danox Harrison and I hope you've been having a fun week of solo queue and haven't been getting ganked too much. Let's dive right into what's shifted up for the patch. Starting off with the top lane, in God tier we have Cho'Gath, Garen and Malphite, and in S tier we have Volibear, Wukong, Nasus, Urgot, Darius and Gnar. The big changes coming at the top lane are around items. First up, we've seen Black Cleaver getting an extra 100 HP and 200 gold shaved up the cost. It no longer has its Butcher passive, which deals extra damage once your armor shred is stacked, and it is now back to giving movement speed to the user. Overall, this makes it a much better item. It's not as good in long fights against tanks as it was before, but most bruisers don't really struggle with those, and the cheaper cost means you get a bigger spike sooner, and the movement speed helps with your stickiness, which is more oftenly an issue for those champs. With 25 ability haste, 400 health and 40 AD, it's just a huge ball of stats for a decent price. The other big change is Stridebreaker. Now, a top lane expert thinks that this is a relatively neutral change in terms of strength. The dash distance have gone from 200 to 300, but in return the damage of the active has dropped and the slow amount has gone from 60% to 40%. That extra range can definitely come in useful, but the reduced slow and damage means you won't have as much impact on connecting with the target. It's a pretty marginal change to both aspects and it'll vary based on champion whether or not this is an overall positive or negative change. Kicking things off with Volibear, he's been super successful in the top lane. He's really powerful laning with easy ability to shove the wave with his passive, and he trades well into most bruisers, even ones who typically cause problems in the laning phase. Volibear is monstrous when ahead, he feels unkillable, does a ton of damage, and can't even be stopped by turrets. There's a range of options when it comes to build. There's more damage focus, more tank focus, and even some with a mix of AP, and it's his flexibility that gives him a lot of strength. When it comes to team fighting, getting on the backline causes huge issues. Until 3 or more items, most AD carries don't have the damage to cut through them quickly, and it doesn't take him long just to shred through them. If you're dealing with a Volibear, you need peel, you need to keep him at bay, and particularly avoid getting hit by his ult as it's a lot of burst damage. Urgot is another champion who's doing well into a range of bruisers. His mid game spike is huge and he's capable of doing a ton of damage when someone gets up close to him, and a big reason he's doing so well at the moment is Stridebreaker. Urgot's only dash is short range and he's pretty reliant on hitting it to ensure he can utilize his shotgun legs. Stridebreaker gives him an extra way of getting up close, and the slow makes it easier to land his flip. Once on top of the target, Urgot is capable of doing huge amounts of damage while being bulky enough to win duels and survive in team fights. His ult gives huge momentum when you get to those team fights. Once you get one kill, the AoE fear swings things massively in your favour, and once you're pulling someone in close to you, you can flash at the last second and reposition that fear. If you're hitting multiple people with it, it's such a game-winning ultimate. Fiora got some nice buffs in the last patch, and although she's still a little finicky in rougher matchups, once she gets rolling she's a monster. In terms of dueling, not many champions can beat her once she has 2 items, and if she gets fed she's capable of winning against 2, 3 and sometimes even more champions. Laning phase is delicate and falling behind can really hurt Fiora, as she only really offers damage. She's best picked as a counter and into matchups she's comfortable with. Currently the hot build with her is Essence Weave into Shield Bow. This gives you a ton of burst on your Qs, but also a lot of survivability thanks to the Shield Bow. Against squishier opponents, the crit helps to pop them, and against tanks, your percentage true damage decimates them. There's not many champions who can survive well against Fiora's damage later in the game. It's simply a matter of you getting to that point. Moving on to the jungle. In the God tier, we have Udyr and Skarner, and in the S tier, we have Dr. Mundo, Hecarim, Nunu, Rammus, Shaco, Evelynn, Ivern, Kha'Zix, and Elise. The jungle hasn't seen too many changes other than some slight tweaks. Udyr has his health per level lowered and his aura damage on his R, but he's been performing so well that this is unlikely going to be enough to clip his wings. His initial burst from R is still massive, and he's still incredibly tanky when he gets rolling. Rammus has a much bigger nerf to his health per level that did push him out of God tier, but he's still looking to be a strong performer, just not quite as invincible. There was a buff to Master Yi's on-hit damage, and this is definitely a positive change, but skewed towards his late game, which is when he's already strong, so it's unlikely to have too much of an impact. Now, Mundo has started to show up again in pro play, and he's the sort of champion who still functions really well in lower ranks. He's a simple champion who's relatively easy to pilot, but really effective. You'll likely remember him being strong earlier in the preseason when Sunfire was super powerful, but now the other tank mythics are the go-to for him. Frostfire makes him hard to get away from, sticky and extremely bulky, while Chem Tank is a solid option to help you chase down mobile targets and get in range of them. In the mid game, Mundo really excels. He's far too bulky for most carries to cut through, and it's only bruisers who can really challenge him in duels. It's important to be a little cautious though, as if you get focused by several champions at once, you can be bursted down before your ult can give you much value. Typically, Shaco has been a champion which is lent on by one-tricks and players who main it, but with the changes in 11.5 helping his jungle clear and his win rate steadily climbing, he's in a solid spot for any jungle player to pick up. His early gank pressure is massive and he's capable of easily snowballing a game when fed. Creative gank paths thanks to his Q and his invisibility make him really hard to play against, and often in solo queue a strong early game from a Shaco is enough to have your opponents looking to FF at 15. If you're playing against a Shaco, then control wards are your friends, and be sure to ward a little bit deeper than usual, as often Shaco uses invisibility to bypass typical warding spots. Level 1 invades are also effective, as you can remove his traps and make his early clear a lot less effective. And remember, watch out for that level 2 gank. It's super common, especially in the mid lane, and often it can win a game off the back of that, especially if your laners get tilted. Now Elise is another early power pick, and although she's typically more effective in higher elos, she's been finding great success at the lower ranks. She's powerful at landing up massive bursts on top of a cocoon, and she's one of the strongest junglers at level 3, having access to twice as many abilities as most champions. Early pressure is a big factor for Elise, and ideally you want to be able to play around lanes which get a lot of value either from their scaling or ability to just take over games. You do have to be cautious with Elise, as once you go in with your repel, it's pretty tricky to get out again, and if you fall behind with Elise, you essentially become a cocoon bot and really fall off heavily. Moving to the mid lane, in the God tier we have Castin and Anivia, and in the S tier we have Diana, Nico, Annie, Malzahar, Seraphine, Fizz, Echo and Katarina. The mid lane has been left mostly alone, with the last patch having large changes to Everfrost which are still settling in. The big tweaks were to Seraphine and Karma. Seraphine had her passive note damage toned down a fair bit in teamfights and a longer ult cooldown early. These changes definitely hurt, but they aren't major, and she's definitely still deserving of S tier. Karma had a Q cooldown reduced by 1 second each rank. This doesn't sound huge, but she's been having a steady flow of buffs, and with how critical her Q is to her kit, any reduction in an already short cooldown is massive, helping her both with trading and clearing waves. There were some other minor changes, with Qiyana getting some extra damage at a W and R, and Azir losing some soldier damage, but ultimately they aren't going to have a huge impact on their placing, especially not at lower ranks. Despite not a recent direct change, Diana's emerged as a bit of a sleeper OP. Her dueling and skirmishing is really powerful after level 6, and she's capable of finding all-ins before that against more vulnerable lanes. Having the options of Verdant Barrier or Seeker's Arm Guard to survive difficult lanes makes her hard to harass and drive out, and once she gets to the mid game she's capable of dictating teamfights single-handedly. A huge ult on the backline can win games at any point, and if you manage to connect onto a high value target you can demolish them, especially if you're fed. Zhonya's is a powerful tool to combine with your ult to allow you to disrupt in teamfights without getting blown up too quickly. Annie is still a really strong performer in solo queue. She's been high on her tier list for a really long time, and it's because of how consistent she is. She's easy to farm with, she can have a high impact in teamfights, and she's capable of bursting squishier and even tankier targets with her combo. In terms of build, you can opt for Ludens for the extra wave clear, or Protobelt if you want extra engage power, but either way, if you're looking for an easy to play and high value mid lane pick, then Annie is definitely a solid option. Make sure you're stacking up your passive with your Q and using it to farm and getting that consistent CS numbers. I think if you're someone who typically struggles with keeping your farm high, Annie is really effective at securing them, especially under tower, as if she does manage to get a kill with a Q, she gets her mana back, she gets that reduced cooldown. It's a really nice mechanic to help you with farming. Moving on to the AD carries, in the God tier we have Jhin, Seraphine and Sivir, and in the S tier we have Jinx, Tristana, Misfortune, Swain, Kai'Sa and Vayne. AD carry changes are mostly focused around Senna. She rose to priority on the back of a new Kraken Slayer Ginsu's build, but with 11.5 she's getting a lot of her synergy nerfed down. She's still looking to be a solid pick, but this does hit her pretty heavily, and often Senna's place in the meta is pretty fragile. It doesn't always take big nerfs to knock her out. Samira got some compensation buffs because, as was highlighted last video, they hit her like a truck. And although these changes do negate that slightly, she's still in a really rough spot after 11.4 and pretty low down on the tier list. Kog'Maw also got a minor buff, and Seraphine's nerves do affect her in the bot lane as well, but neither of these are significant enough to change their places in the list. Draven has been struggling for a while, having not really found his place since the preseason, but he's finally starting to get some solid results. Shieldbow has always been the go-to mythic for him, and with its recent buffs he started to find a foothold again. He's a really strong laner, and a lot of the strong aggressive supports sync really well with him. He's capable of challenging short-range AD carries like Kai'Sa and Sivir easily, and although longer-ranged AD carries can harass him and cause issues, if he has a strong support matchup he can look to find good all-ins. Once he gets rolling, he's almost unstoppable, and it's an easy win once he gets to cash in those stacks and just gets miles ahead in the game. We talked a bit about the Jinx buffs that came in with the past couple of patches, and it started to reflect not only in her win rate but her play rate as well. The ranged increase was huge, but I think the most understated change was to her traps. With how quick they are to activate now, it's very easy to chain it with CC from your support to effectively lengthen that CC duration. When playing more defensively, you also have a solid ability to shut down dive threats, as dashes over her active traps get stopped midway, similar to how Vigor's cage works, so even against mobile champions, you have tools to handle them. Late game, Jinx is a powerhouse, able to chain kills really effectively on the back of her passive and the huge range on her rockets. The thing that is making her strong right now is the fact that her laning is also threatening. If you put 2 points into Q, you now have as much range as a Caitlyn does, which you can get at level 4 in the game. It really means that your trading power is strong, and as I said before, traps can keep you safe, so a stronger early game for Jinx and the typical super powerful late game we expect from her. Ezreal isn't the hottest low elo champion, but that's typically because although he has a huge play rate, he's hard to execute on and difficult in solo queue. But he has made a resurgence though, as since the mana immune nerfs he was struggling, he's now found a new build that's working well for him. It involves rushing Essence Reaver, which is an item that's been popping up more and more recently. Now it gives him the Sheen proc and a load of ability haste, and then you build Duskblade second for huge burst damage. With the recent buffs to Ionians as well, you're capable of getting 60 ability haste from only 2 completed items on your boots. With how well Ezreal scales with his cooldowns being reduced, this makes him really powerful in the mid game, and when piloted correctly, he's very capable of carrying games. Taking a look at the support role finally, in the God tier we have Thresh and Seraphine, and in the S tier we have Morgana, Leona, Alistar, Lulu, Zillion, Bard and Rel. Support has seen some tweaks, especially some of the stronger supports. Seraphine's had a passive tone down and her ult has a longer cooldown early. This does make her a bit weaker, but she's still powerful enough to be in God tier. Rel has had her armor reduced and the cooldowns on her W in both forms increased by 2 seconds. And this is actually a pretty big one, and as a result she's left God tier. She's still powerful and capable of finding huge engages, but the extra cooldown on her W means her skirmishing is weaker and she has more downtime between her locking targets down. We did also see a change to Pyke with regards to his grey health, but it doesn't fix his issues, which is that he's facing a lot of rough matchups in the current meta and isn't the best at mitigating pressure against things like Leona and Rel. Morgana has made a big resurgence recently, and you're probably tired of me saying it, but champs like Rel, Thresh, Leona, Alistar are big issues for bot lanes, as their engage potential and all-in threat can stop you from even getting out of the laning phase. This is where Morgana comes in. Her Black Shield is a really powerful tool for stopping CC, and her binding can punish your opponents who step too far. When you're playing with a high value carry who needs peel, she's really good at facilitating them. Post 6, your ult is a great lockdown tool, and grabbing an early stopwatch makes it a lot easier to get it off without getting bursted. In terms of laning, ideally you want to be paired up with a long range AD carry. Jinx and Caitlyn are great examples who can also layer CC with your binding to keep someone in place for eons. Now I will say that Morgana is better as a counter pick, so picking a blind can cause some issues. If you're picking her into enchanters or mages, she isn't as effective. She wants to be playing into those heavy all-in CC champions. Karma has been getting some buffs time and time again for a while, and although her solo queue win rate still isn't amazing, these last buffs have put her in a decent spot. Her scaling is solid, and her harass in lane allows you to control the wave and have priority. Similar to Morgana, she pairs best with a long range AD carry who can join her in harassing opponents and taking priority in lane. Jhin, Caitlyn, MF and Jinx are all solid examples. One concern for her isn't too aggressive all-in lanes. You need to be aware of getting locked down and do your best to chip away at their health bars before they get a chance to force an all-in. Big tip if you're playing Karma is that if you mantra and then W, it gives you a heal initially based on your missing health, and then also when the root activates you get a second heal. It's really effective when you're getting focused in an all-in and can often buy enough time that your AD carry can get a heavy trade in return and potentially take a target down. Braum is another champion who's received steady buffs, and it's finally pushed him above a 50% win rate in gold elo. Now something I want to state clearly is that Braum isn't great in every scenario. Picking him into an enchanter like Karma doesn't work very well, as you don't have the pressure to find an all-in, and you'll just get harassed down with little recourse. He does however fare very well into aggressive melee supports, as once they engage you can block the AD carry's damage, apply your passive and win out in the extended fight. He excels at skirmishing, as his passive is a massive tool as long as he has allies to apply it to, and he scales fairly well in certain circumstances, as he can block huge game winning abilities from finding their impact. Now this definitely is a better time to bring out Braum than it has been for a while, but it's best to keep him as a counter pick rather than a first pick. That wraps things up for 11.5. Hope this has been helpful and you feel a bit more clued up for the coming patch. Be sure to subscribe if you want to keep updated with our tier list, and fly on over to mobalytics.gg to check out the full list in one place. I'll see you guys next time.